and welcome to Central Park. It's Peter Thomas Senese, a dedicated and loving father, a successful chasing parent all too familiar with international parental child abduction, and the author of Chasing the Cyclone. I have come to realize that the legal system established to dutifully protect would-be victims fails them. Nevertheless, there is a system in place that can work if, in fact, those that are responsible to implement it are given the chance. The first critically important step is to educate society about this terrible ordeal children must face. Courts, child psychologists, and therapists from around the world, and children victims everywhere, now mature and old enough to speak out about their abduction experience, all conclude the same thing. The parental child abduction of a minor is a grave and highly offensive criminal act that includes violations of criminal laws on child abduction, as well as laws governing child abuse and child neglect. Unfortunately, many parental child abductions occur since the abducting parent's actions are typically directed at their spouse or former spouse, whereas the abducting parent uses the child as a pawn to seek revenge and spite against the other parent. In addition, and horribly, children are all too often used as financial pawns for one parent against the other. In certain cases, the abduction of a child across international borders has a completely different motive other than the relocation of a child for a better life. It has to do with money, power, greed, and manipulation of the other parent. Tragically, many of these cases spin out of control, with the final outcome being that the child or children suffer serious, disturbing consequences if they are lucky enough to survive the abduction altogether. The number of international parental child abductions are rapidly growing. Tens of thousands of these types of crimes occur each year. Many of these cases are not resolved. This type of hideous crime against defenseless, innocent children will continue to increase unless dramatic steps are taken. Sadly, I want to tell you that it is not that difficult for one parent to abduct a child from another parent and remove that child across international borders. Once this happens, both child and chasing parent have now embarked on the cruelest of nightmares, one rightfully filled with overwhelming feelings of hopelessness and fear. For the stolen child, they typically now live a life as a fugitive while also being denied the love of the other parent. Abuse, neglect, fear, and instability are all common. Make no mistake, they have now been taken and are held hostage. And there are deaths. Some of our children never come home. They can't. They were murdered. For the chasing parent, they now embark upon an odyssey that is incomprehensible. Their child or children are now gone, taken to another country, one with its own customs and laws. Be mindful, many parents don't even know what country their child was abducted to. What they do know is that their child is somewhere in the world, out there. But where? And for those parents who are fortunate enough to know what country their child was taken to, they soon have a very rude awakening. These parents realize that any law or court orders issued regarding their child in the country they are in really has little bearing in the courts of the country that the child was now abducted to. These chasing parents are forced to navigate a complex international legal maze. That is, if they are willing and capable of doing so. There are many grave obstacles in their way. This includes the fact that not every country is a signatory member of the international treaties that attempt to address the crime of international parental child abduction. The primary international treaty is known as the Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Parental Child Abduction. And remarkably, many nations who are signatories do not uphold the intent or the spirit of the treaty to which they signed. Though there are many other serious obstacles a chasing parent faces, all adding up to the fact that the life they lived prior to their child's abduction is now over, there is one obstacle that I believe needs to be addressed. If you are a chasing parent seeking to rescue and recover your child who, according to serious federal and state laws, was criminally stolen, you better have the financial capacity to pay for nearly every aspect of your attempted rescue and recovery effort. Now, I am sure you must be asking yourself, how could that be if my child was criminally and illegally stolen? Well, it is. When the United States Congress approved the Hague Convention, it did so with the provisions that no financial aid would be provided to chasing parents in their attempt to recover their child or children. Imagine what the legal cost will be if you are required to file a legal action in both the country that your child was taken from, as well as the country that your child was taken to. And make no mistake, this area of law is very complex. And if you think that your court case is going to be quick, not drawn out by the abducting parent and their lawyer, well, you are in store for another rude awakening. Add in the costs associated with your travel, communication, translators if necessary, and you're beginning to see the picture. And now, add in the extraordinary costs, if you can afford it, of hiring private investigators in order to find your child, or if you have great concern that perhaps even if you know where your child may be located, the abducting parent has the capability of disappearing and going underground. This cost can be enormous. The most critical of all elements is to know where your child is, while also letting the abducting parent know that you are not walking away. International parental child abduction is a cruel crime that can potentially destroy the lives of all those that are involved. Worldwide, the numbers are growing, yet there is little research and understanding on this devastating topic. But there are some remedies that can make a difference, and it begins with society's understanding of how large and devastating of an epidemic we have on our hands, and the futility many victimized children and their chasing parents face. So what can be done? In the courts, local family court judges need to become more aware and educated on all matters of potential international child abduction, including the techniques and legal loopholes potential parental child abductors and their lawyers may use to facilitate a child's abduction across a country's borders. The court must also consider how once a child is taken to a foreign country, what legal methods an abducting parent may pursue in their attempt to remove jurisdiction of the child's custody and access from the place of original habitual residency to the country that the child was now taken to. According to many professional studies and surveys, a large percentage of judges and lawyers are not adequately educated or familiar with the complex legal nuances of international child custody and international child abduction. in the failures to understand jurisdictional law and failures to direct stringent guidelines when dealing with a potential or actual abduction, judges and the courts they oversee have unknowingly helped facilitate and enable abducting parents act in the cruelest way against their own child. Critically, the best defense against international parental child abduction is to place highly informative, thoroughly researched data into well-trained and capable hands of educated judges who are familiar with the complexity of international law and child custody. Judges who are trained in parental international child abduction law. In addition, courts and judges overseeing child custody cases must create stringent guidelines that will address the wrongful removal, abduction, and retention of a child traveling either interstate or across a country's borders prior to any travel by that child or a parent with that child. If a non-traveling parent expresses concern to a court that there is a possibility that their child may be abducted, the courts must create ironclad guidelines on how to deal with such action. This includes automatic triggers that will ensure criminal prosecution of an abducting parent that must be included and agreed to by all parties, including the courts, prior to a parent and child being permitted to travel outside of the country of the child's habitual residency. If, of course, that judge believes that the parent who is requesting to travel with the child outside of the country may not return, if there's the slightest of hint or thought, that child should not be permitted to go, and the parent who is in possession of the passport should be required to turn that passport over to the court. If a court does allow for a parent to travel with their child, it would be wise for that court located in the child's habitual residency to mandate for the traveling parent to file with the court in the jurisdiction of the country to which they are visiting the custody and return orders of the court overseeing the child's welfare before any type of travel is granted. The traveling parent must agree to have specific language in any court-issued order that specifically states that they are only visiting the country that they are traveling to, that they are not relocating, that the other parent does not give permission to them to take the child and relocate to another country, and finally, that they agree to the court's orders issued by the court of habitual residency of the child to be held accountable under criminal law of the nation where the child lived previously, and that they agree to waive any rights to fight criminal extradition if there is any arrest warrant issued due to the failure to return the child to their native country by a predetermined date set by the court of habitual residency. These orders must then be registered or mirrored in a court of jurisdiction where the child is visiting prior to any travel. Courts must treat parental child abduction in the same manner as a non-parental child abduction, as a grave and dangerous crime against a defenseless minor. In fact, the majority of child psychologists and experts familiar with the matter of parental child abduction and who have issued reports and studies have concluded that the potential damage done on a young child who has experienced parental child abduction's overall mental health can be significantly more damaged in comparison to a non-parental child abduction due to the heavy breach of trust and acts of parental alienation, including child abuse and child neglect, that is enacted by the abducting parent. Courts must legally hold accountable both parties in a custody dispute for any acts of contempt of court or perjury when dealing with the welfare and safety of a child. There must be a zero tolerance level for acts of disobedience or untruths stated to the court. Courts must legally hold accountable lawyers of parental child abductors who knowingly assist their clients in the abduction of a wrongful retention of a child. Courts must uphold mandatory criminal prosecution and sentencing of all parental child abductors. The act of criminal parental child abduction includes the breach of most nations and their local courts' criminal codes on child abduction, child abuse, and child neglect. In addition, there are typically a high number of contempt of court violations and deceitful acts of perjury enacted by an abducting parent in these cases. Their actions must be held accountable. In doing so, a clear message will be sent to parents contemplating an abduction that if they are caught, they will face serious prosecution. The court must order a financial bond to be placed by a traveling parent who intends to take a child across international borders and whose spouse has objected to such travel due to fear of a non-return. Guidelines to determine a troubling concern include, but should not be limited to, a parent's previous abduction history or visitation denials to the other parent, and a traveling parent's ability to facilitate an abduction. Assailants who assist a parental child abductor must be criminally and civilly held responsible for any assistance given to a parental child abductor. Parental child abductors must be held financially responsible for all costs associated with the legal recovery and reunification of the victimized child and their left-behind parent. Courts must unilaterally reinforce the universally accepted laws that child abduction in all forms is a severe form of child abuse and child neglect. Any form of child abduction is not in the best interest of the child, and these individuals must be prosecuted. Courts must not rush to judgment when dealing with any issues regarding custody and mobility, and must weigh heavily the fact that a child has an equal right to have a loving and caring and ongoing day-to-day relationship with both parents, so long as both parents are capable and desirous of doing so. Courts must act carefully with respect to all preventive measures. All children are considered a ward of the state where they reside. It is a judge's responsibility to protect that child. One additional way for a judge to do so is to order for the immediate seizure of all passports of a potential abductor, while also having the court issue direction to the embassy where a non-national parent who may abduct originates from, with specific direction that there is an active family matter in progress and that their court orders for the embassy to not issue any new passports to either the named potential abductor or the child or children in question. Finally, judges should seek the advice and the counsel of experts who work in the area of international parental child abduction. This is critical, and where possible, these judges should seek the advice and direction of trained mediators who have the wherewithal and ability to render credentialed opinion. Outside of the courts, law enforcement must also become more proactive. In particular, law enforcement officers must stop deferring a child's detention or wrongful removal in breach of a child custody order back to the courts of jurisdiction overseeing a child custody case. if a jurisdiction's criminal code that deals with such violations has been breached. By not acting in matters of wrongful child detention or wrongful removal, law enforcement, in fact, accommodates parental violators. Additionally, there are issues pertaining to the Hague Convention that need to be addressed. In the United States, Congress must provide federal funding to all chasing parents left behind in order to assist in their legal expenses and recovery efforts of their abducted child. Presently, the entire financial burden of an attempted child recovery is the responsibility of a chasing parent. The United States and other complying Hague signatory or international tribunal governments must consider financial sanctions to be imposed against non-complying Hague signatory governments as well as non-signatory countries when a nation that a child is abducted to does not comply with the Hague Convention or any other treaty that they are a signatory of with respect to child custody and child abduction. Diplomatic and economic efforts must be utilized at the highest degree to direct and press present non-Hague signatories to sign the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international child abduction. Non-United States citizens found guilty of international child abduction under the civil rules of the Hague Court must not be permitted to enter the U.S. Hague cases may be complex. However, the convention was created to establish a uniform set of international guidelines dealing with a child's jurisdiction and which nation's courts must oversee the overall welfare of a child. All cases must be streamlined, and preventive measures must be taken by the Hague courts to further narrow the potential time an appeal can be brought to the court by an abducting parent who is in physical retention of a child and who refuses or disregards a return order to the location of the child's habitual residency. And finally, courts upholding the Hague Convention must uphold the spirit of the Convention with respect to the expeditious process to which it is governed to act. With all of this said, I want to also deeply acknowledge that there is a system that is in place that can work. I do support the Hague Convention on the civil aspects of international parental child abduction, and I sure would like to acknowledge that there exist some amazing individuals who work in the area of international parental child abduction. I'm Peter Thomas Senese. I'm the author of Chasing the Cyclone. I'm a successful chasing parent. Most of all, I'm a father who loves a little boy. I hope this video may be helpful. Thank you.